So I'd like to welcome to the stage Ohio Lieutenant Governor Mary Taylor, who in her private pre-elective office was a CPA, and she certainly brought those skills to public service. She was elected as Ohio State Auditor in 2006, and then as Lieutenant Governor, she has served as Director of the Department of Insurance and oversees regulatory reform, two tasks where it comes in handy to have a financial background. But the Lieutenant Governor has also taken a deep interest in the opioid crisis that has hit Ohio and our region. When she learned of today's conference, she wanted to be part of it and to lend her voice to the need to apply research-based solutions to this challenge. So at the public policy level, she's very in touch with the crisis and has called for a comprehensive solution that involves a spectrum of partners. But there's another piece of the story of Mary Taylor's interest in this topic. With two sons in recovery, she understands this epidemic at the family level, the personal level. So here to introduce author Sam Quinones, please welcome Ohio Lieutenant Governor Mary Taylor.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you. I was going to make just a few comments and then introduce our very, very special guest speaker. So let me just start by saying this. Who planned UC and Xavier today? It took me 45 minutes to get here from downtown Cincinnati. You do know there is no bigger rivalry in Southern Ohio than what's going on campus, so I apologize. We are running late today because of me. But anyway, it's great to be with all of you, and let me start by first thanking Northern Kentucky University, and of course, particularly thanking Provost Sue Ott Rollins for the invitation to be here and for hosting this conference today to discuss how we can all work together and find solutions to stop the opiate epidemic that's plaguing our states. I want to congratulate you for the foresight to focus this first annual conference on the issues of research on neonatal abstinence syndrome, or NAS. The devastating effect of this epidemic has yet to be known, how it's going to impact our newborn children. Giving them the care they need and understanding the long-term consequences of being born with NAS is a moral imperative to protect these innocent lives. I am also convinced that addressing the needs of the generation of children born to addicts is going to be one of the monumental public policy issues that we will face for decades to come. I recently visited a new facility in Dayton, Ohio. It's a one-of-a-kind in Ohio, which is providing treatment and care to newborns that are fighting NAS. Because of its unique mission, this clinic doesn't fit into any one single category when it comes to government regulations. So my team has been working with them to navigate the process so that they can become fully operational in the state of Ohio. We want them to succeed, and we want a framework in place in order for others to follow suit and create more facilities to help more children in need of care. Forums like this one today provide valuable insights and ideas to make our goals a reality. They have helped me think anew when developing my own policies for combating the drug epidemic in Ohio. Just yesterday, I introduced my basic actions that I propose taking for the future vision of the state of Ohio. I am prepared to ask voters in the state of Ohio to join the fight by approving a state bond issue of up to $1 billion over a 10-year period of time, with the proceeds being used to fund capital and startup costs for privately owned and operated treatment. We need to make sure that we have treatment facilities available for those living in addiction today, covering the full continuum of care. I also would propose to fund new to fund research in new breakthrough medical techniques to treat pain without using opiates, but also look for ways to stop the addiction from starting in the first place. And third, I would fund with these proceeds what I call boots on the ground. I've talked to too many law enforcement officers across the state of Ohio who can't pursue the cases against drug dealers because they do not have the manpower or financial resources. We need to get the dealers off our streets and hold them accountable for the crimes they're committing, and I am committed to providing boots on the ground, funding law enforcement officers who can investigate these cases and ultimately hold these individuals accountable. One thing that I learned very clearly from Sam the first time I had the opportunity to meet and discuss this challenge that we're facing not only in Ohio, Kentucky, but across our country, was that it is a supply problem. And I think there's a big debate around, is this addiction crisis a demand or a supply problem? So I think it's important for states to continue to work with the president and the administration in Washington, as well as I am prepared to leverage relationships that I have with the Great Lakes governors and specifically with premiers in Canada to shut this stuff down at our borders. We had an open and great conversation specifically with Premier Wynne in Ontario. She is prepared to share data, share resources, and to better understand how these illicit drugs are getting on the streets of not only the states like Ohio and Kentucky, but she, of course, is also worried about what's going on in Canada. It's these type of relationships that need to be fostered and built in order to have the resources necessary to keep this stuff from coming into our countries in the first place. Further, I will work to raise public awareness to the mental health challenges that are so often associated with addiction. We cannot allow the social stigma to stand in the way of seeking help for addicts and families at their earliest possible moment. I will continue to share my story, my personal story about my two sons who have suffered through addiction, who are both living in recovery today. I have lived the nightmare that too many Ohio families have suffered. So far, my story turns out pretty well. After 2 overdoses, my son lived, and I know too many families do not have the same ending to their story. But as addiction goes, it's one day at a time. And if you ask me how they're doing, today they're doing well. But understanding addiction, again, it's one day at a time. I believe that as we share our personal stories, we make it easier for others to talk about the crisis that too many Ohio and Kentucky families are living in. But it also helps us have real conversations around the solutions to stop this crisis. I mentioned that these policies have their genesis in forums like this today, and in the many conversations I've had with professionals and families all across the state of Ohio. I must add that my policies and initiatives were also significantly informed by today's speaker, Sam Quinones. Sam is a former Los Angeles Times reporter and author of Dreamland, The True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic. If you have not read it, I would highly encourage you do so. I had the opportunity to sit down and talk with Sam earlier this year. The impact of Sam's book and that meeting has been lasting for me. Not only did Sam give me some of the history of how Ohio came to be the epicenter of the opiate epidemic that I had not heard before, he connected me with Provost Rowlands here at Northern Kentucky University, which led for my opportunity to be here today. His book, Dreamland, is essential reading to understand this crisis. It comes up in virtually every discussion I have with experts on this issue, and I always recommend the book. I highly recommend reading the book. Not only is he a superb investigative journalist, but Sam is a master storyteller. His narrative is both eye-opening and heartbreaking. He is also an important force behind the inaugural Ohio River Valley Addiction Research Consortium. It was here at Northern Kentucky University over a year ago that Sam challenged the region to develop collaborative efforts to battle the opiate epidemic. That challenge is being answered thanks to the hard work of leaders like Provost Sue Ott Rowlands. It is truly going to take all of us, from government, from education and academia, law enforcement, nonprofit, families, and other community partners to stop this epidemic and ultimately save lives. Once again, it is a great honor to have the opportunity to be with you and, of course, to hear from another expert on the subject. It is my pleasure and great honor to ask Sam Quinones to come to the stage.
Yeah. Oh, I hope I don't blow it.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor. Let me shake your hand. Thank you for being here. Hi, Sam.
Sue, we meet again.
We keep
Leave it again.
doing this. I'm going to assume, I think I'm there. I'm going to assume that most of the people in this room have indeed read your book. Is that correct? By a show of hands, so most people have. It certainly has been an influential book for all of us in so many ways. And you heard the Lieutenant Governor talk about how ORVARC, it was really an idea that you had, having visited the region a number of times. Can you just sort of briefly talk about that?
Sure. First of all, can you all hear me out there? Yeah. It's just really fantastic to be here with you guys. When I was writing Dreamland, I told some of you may have heard me say this, but it bears repeating that when I was writing it, I just was certain that it would fail when it came out because it did not seem to me that anyone cared about this topic. I would go to, families in particular were really reluctant to talk about their loved ones who got caught up in it. That meant the media really didn't pay much attention because if you don't have families and they're, and then politicians didn't either. So I want to thank the Lieutenant Governor for being here. It's very kind. It's really great to meet you. When the heck was it? It was a long time ago. Yeah, it was in Columbus, I remember. Anyway, very nice to meet you, and I'm very glad that you, when I suggested you get in touch, that you followed up. It's that kind of what we need from political leaders, seems to me. We need to be the continuity, the consistency in following up on this. So I want to say thank you very much and your kind words very meant a lot. I'm blown away, honestly. I'm completely amazed. I wish my wife and daughter were here. I wish my family were here. We all contributed to this book. But I really want to say how much I appreciate your, those of you who've read it, that this is somehow an important, has helped you in some way. So I want to say that above all to you, Sue, for, first of all, bringing me here, but then also your continued, and Mark, where did Mark go? He's over there somewhere.
Wandering over there.
There's Mark. Thank you, Mark, for your work on bringing all this. I do believe that this is, as you know, the future of this. I think the theme of this story, the theme of this issue is isolation versus community. We got into this because of isolation, and the only way out is through community in a variety of ways, but certainly combining people who are interested in this, in research on this, and that, which brings me to your question. As I was wandering through Portsmouth, Ohio, repeatedly over the summer of the years 2013 and 14, I began to realize that there was, in fact, in Portsmouth, Ohio, although it looked at the time like quite a bombed-out town, really down on its luck, there was also an enormous, if you dug into it and you got to know it and you immersed yourself in it, you would find that there were a lot of people there in recovery, moving out of that, creating a new culture of recovery that was really exhilarating to watch. At the first blush, Portsmouth, I saw the hookers by the railroad tracks and all that stuff, and the rent-to-owns and the Sonic burgers everywhere and stuff. But then as I got deeper into it and visited I think I went there 6 times eventually, began to realize that there was a lot of recovery going on. It was exhilarating. It was wonderful to see in my country a town that had bought in perhaps years ago to the dependency dogma, that we're a country that doesn't make stuff, that we're a service country and that kind of thing, and anybody who makes stuff is like, for the, history is ash can. And yet, now here were people saying, no, no, we are valuable. We can take this on our own and do this on our own. And part of that was, there was a lot to that story, but part of it was a lot of people in recovery. What I also noticed, though, was that there were some employers willing to give people jobs, but these employers, bless them, did not really offer great jobs to folks. They were Bob Evans, you know. God bless Bob Evans. They hire folks that need work, but you know it is only kind of busboy, wait, that kind of stuff. And there was a couple other businesses, and it seemed to me that that recovering addicts were a raw material. An addict, it's the same body, but it's a new brain. It's a new person. A person who gets into addiction. It's all about negativity, about just ripping stuff off, about essentially destruction and lack of real positive view of the world. People get into addiction, get into recovery, and it's that same person all of a sudden is very energetic, dynamic, grateful, wanting to be part of something bigger. And I found a lot of those folks desperately wanted to be part of something bigger. A lot of them were going back to school at Shawnee State or online to get degrees in social work and what have you, but they had a hell of a time finding work that meant something, that wasn't just a kind of a placeholder for a job, you know, like. And it seemed to me that that was a raw material, that those people were raw material that we would be very, very remiss to overlook and not exploit and not use and not channel that energy. All of a sudden you've got dynamism, you've got excitement for the future in place of relentless negativity, relentless fatalism and inertia, you know? And so it seemed to me, gee, how could you possibly make use of these people? And it seemed very quickly, I remember wandering around the streets downtown, Chillicothe Street, downtown 2nd, and basically in those areas in Portsmouth, thinking, well, gee, why can't there be you know, a concerted effort, a community effort, but by community I mean tri-state, I mean across state lines, to bring new studies. This is reminded me of the narcotics farm that used to be by Lexington, Kentucky, where it was a center of addiction studies. All that we knew about addiction back from the 40s to about the 70s came from the narcotics farm. And we don't, because it was a center of addiction, we have a huge number of addicts in that whole region bisected by the Ohio River, which Portsmouth is part. And it seemed to me that this was an enormous resource, both the addicts and the recovering, the ones who were embarking on recovery. And it seemed to me that gee, that was an opportunity. People looked at it as a stain. But I viewed it as an opportunity. You saw you could bring money, you could bring PhDs, you could have studies that last a decade. You have cheap real estate in a lot of these towns where those studies could be housed. But above all, my feeling was that you could utilize those folks who most needed to be utilized, most wanted to be utilized, who had such intense desire to be part of something bigger, and that would in fact also help their recovery, because when people believe they're part of something much bigger, all of a sudden the other stuff, they forget it, or it goes in the past, right? It's like when you get older, as a boy, you play with baseball cards, and then you get older and you go, what the hell was I thinking? You know, I think that's kind of the way, you know, people told me early on in my thing, you know, in order to move out of recovery, out of addiction, you need to love something more than the dope. And in my case, I thought about that a lot. I thought, I have loved something more than the dope all my adult life. I wake up high with my job. I just love my job so much. And I felt bad for those guys, those people I was meeting who couldn't find that, or were just kind of in, again, that placeholder type job. And so I felt that, I felt that this was something that that could benefit them, benefit the region, benefit the country, and you know, look what has happened in Boston with the study of cancer and so on. Huge economic benefits to that region. Addiction affects far more people than cancer, and except for no one wants to talk about it. And so to me, it felt like this was so so important. And so I figured I got to write so I wrote this op-ed that you very kindly printed and used and said, look, this is nobody wants to be known as a center for addiction, but look at it as an opportunity. This is a great moment. It's a gift. A region that has been bombed out and had so much taken from it. You guys have in your DNA in this region. Look in the last part of last century. This was a great innovative region for steel, for iron, for plate glass, for all kinds of things. This was the first Silicon Valley, right, of industry. And you have that in your DNA, and it can be, I believe, again, but of course it requires some things that are very difficult in this day and age for us to achieve, and that is cross-border discussions, leaving the turf battles at the door somewhere and focusing on collaboration. But you have 3 governors, 6 senators, I don't know how many, if you just count the 3 states, I don't know how many congressmen, college presidents from really great colleges and universities. That's a lobby. That's a huge lobby, it seems to me. And so this was the idea. I remember walking around the streets kind of going, damn, they should do that. And it wasn't until I came here, I began to think, and you were taking kind of like this idea of being a public university, adopting certain public issues. Began to think, well, hell, I'm just going to write that thing and put it, and I send it to the newspapers that I send it to for free. Just run it. I don't care if you pay me. I think that's a great idea. So that's a long answer to a
Well, no, it's a great
question.
answer. And, at NKU, we often refer to ourselves as scrappy. We are a scrappy university, and I'm going to lend that term to this entire region.
Great.
Because we are a scrappy region,
Yeah.
and we're creative, and we're innovative, and we're tenacious. So thank you for the challenge. So, Sam, your book came out in 2015. 2.5 years later, you've been going around the country continuously, I know, exhaustingly, talking to groups like this, many other kinds of groups. You've been learning things. If you could add a chapter to the book at this point, at this moment, what would that be like?
I guess I would add the positives and the negatives of what has happened since then. I mean, as I go around the country, I see, talking about the positives, what I see in many, many counties. You have to keep in mind that this epidemic hits the county level of government most severely. Think of what the county provides, a coroner, jail, court, ER, or usually county hospital, public health department. There's some others, I'm leave sheriff, of course. All of those are bearing the brunt of the foster kids. Normally, that's part of it. Mental health also. Oh my God. So you keep on going, and it's at the county level where you're really, really seeing this most ferociously, it seems to me. And it's at counties where I am happy to report I see many, many counties forming alliances of people who never. It could be a small county. They couldn't know each other, know who each other are. They don't know what the other agencies or departments or nonprofits or groups, Little League, clergy, churches and all, are doing. And to my mind, it's a very, it's not an easy thing, but it's a simple thing. The forming of groups to attack this as a community. And again, it gets to isolation versus community. Before, we were all working like this. In a lot of these counties now, you are seeing increasingly people kind of come together. I was just in McHenry County, Illinois, north of Chicago, 2 days ago. That's exactly what they're doing in McHenry County, Illinois. It's bringing together all these different groups. I was in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, Lycoming County, I think. Pardon me if you're from Williamsport. I can't remember the name of the county. Anyway, there was the college president, there was the DA, but there was also the National Guard, the guys. There were a variety of smaller nonprofits and community groups. There was, churches involved. There were, as far as I remember, service groups like Kiwanis and those kinds, Rotary. All of which is to say that this is, seems to me, this is how you attack an epidemic of a drug that thrives on isolation, creates more once people get addicted. This is the only way. I don't know. I'm a reporter. I don't know how to do this. I've never done it before. I've not studied these things, but it just seems like a logical that this is why you've done, and that you have an opportunity when you do this to defeat some of the worst problems that we face as a country, which has to do with polarization, isolation, little silos all over the place. Is it hard work? You bet it is. And I think another thing that people in politics, but also all of us need to preach is patience. We got into this because we wanted a quick answer to a very, very complicated problem like the issue of the mystery of human pain in the brain. We want pills for everybody, treat everybody as if they're all the same, boom. You know, and what you get is a massive disaster on your hands. However much you may have helped people's pain, you have created a whole bunch of agony along with it. And so to my way of thinking, we need to behave like adults and not get into this idea that we have an easy answer for a complicated, and so it takes patience. It takes working, and people will say, gee, you know, we've got this thing, we're working all this stuff, we put all these things in place, we got some new, all these different ways of attacking what we see are the problems, and the numbers keep going up, and I'm like, yeah, I know, but you know, it's been 20 plus years we've gotten into this, you know, it's just keep on doing it.
We were talking last night at dinner. You had a metaphor that you're working with about the space station. Can you talk a little bit about how you perceive the space station to be, or the space program, I should say, to be a useful metaphor for those of us in this room who care about this?
Yes, exactly. The president announced that this was a national public health emergency. Great. He got criticized a little because, well, it's not a national emergency. To me, that was like a minor detail. The bigger issue is what comes with that. And my feeling is that we have in our history, two templates that would be good to follow, to look at and say. One is the Marshall Plan after World War II, one of the greatest foreign policy achievements in the history of foreign policy, if you ask me, where an entire country spent a huge amount of money rebuilding because we didn't want the toxic disaster that was the Third Reich to be repeated, and we developed a whole new set of countries. We helped rebuild them, and they became friends and allies, and the economic, cultural, societal benefits are indisputable, and it was a lot of money. Particularly for the time. The space program is another one I think we ought to think of. John F. Kennedy said we choose to do these things not because they are easy, but because they are hard. And I think this is one of the hardest things we're going to undertake. But also the space program did what? It infused lots of money, but also PhDs, lots of very, very creative, smart people to figure out a certain issue. And then it lasted. It didn't end. It didn't even end when we went to the moon. It kept on going. That's a beautiful idea. It's a great American idea. It just is, we're going to keep on doing this. We're going to keep on testing frontiers. Now, this problem, it seems to me, the president would be very well counseled, I think, to view this in the same way, and to view then, therefore, the response as something that goes that requires a certain stick-to-itiveness, you know, just not saying 1 year is enough. It will not be enough. 5 years will not be enough. The commitment has to be long-term, has to be through administrations, you know, and but in the long run, I think it's important that the space program is also illustrative because out of the space program came all these ancillary benefits, huge economic benefits, amazing new scientific breakthroughs that probably weren't even envisioned when JFK gave that speech. And so, to me, I believe this is the same way. You have to, as I got into this, see, when I wrote the book, I thought I was writing a book about drug trafficking. I'm a crime reporter. That's my background, okay? Crime, immigration, gangs, Mexico, drug trafficking. I love that stuff, man. And I got into it because that's the book I thought I was writing. I'm writing a book about drug traffickers and pharmaceutical marketing. And then as time went on, I realized, no, this is a much bigger book. It's a big book about who we are as Americans and what afflicts us now, what we become. And so I think it's important to think of this not in terms of drug addiction per se, although certainly, of course, but think in terms of the broader issues, like maybe a Marshall Plan for the Rust Belt. You know, these are folks, the Rust Belt area are folks who lost in the great roll of the dice, so the free market, globalization, free trade roll of the dice. And we view them as somehow, because they lost, as somehow they brought it on themselves. And to some degree they did, but to a very deep degree I think they did not. I think part of this would be to address the economic issues of those communities, and they're not just in the Rust Belt. They're in New Mexico, they're in Maine, in a variety of areas all across, and they're in South Carolina. They're in the Central Valley of California, my own home state. So my feeling is that we have in this. It's a gift. It's almost a gift. It's horrible to say that because so many people have suffered and died, and families have been destroyed, and it's a horrible, horrible torment that's going on across this country. But at the same time, again, just as we use this as a possibility for this regional renewal, I believe as a country we need to view this as an opportunity for moving beyond the pettiness, an opportunity for moving beyond the polarization. The only issue in America today that does not divide, that I can identify, that does not quickly divide along red and blue lines is this one. I don't see any others anyway. And so to me, this feels like the space program, you know, something like that, inspirational, visionary, that this is an opportunity, not we're going to try to make life better for a bunch of damn addicts. Oh my God, do we really have to? You know, I mean, that's
It also touched on our need for hope, right?
Yes.
And to do something collectively that we couldn't do individually, which always then reminds me about your plea to avoid the isolationism and come together as community. I want to just take a moment to reflect on what you were just saying about paying attention to the economic realities that are facing our communities today, the same communities that are struggling so mightily with these addiction challenges. In your packets and on your table, you'll find a card for, and just forgive me, Sam, for digressing, but it comes back and it connects and it leads to my next question.
Go for it, go.
This is a card that tells you that we're bringing Matthew Desmond, who wrote the Pulitzer Prize-winning book Evicted, in April. It's the same impulse that led to our invitation to Sam, what will be 2 years later. And Matthew Desmond's book, Evicted, talks about housing insecurity and homelessness. And the reason why I wanted to share one quote with you from this is because it does tie back exactly to what we're talking about. This is the problem of addiction, of course, as you all know in this room, is a holistic problem. It's not one thing or the other. And Desmond says homelessness contributes to physical, behavioral, and mental health problems in adults and children. Lack of housing and overcrowding found in temporary housing for the homeless contribute to morbidity from respiratory infections and tuberculosis. Substandard housing, such as that used by the homeless population, often lacks safe drinking water and hot water for washing, often have ineffective waste disposal, intrusion by disease vectors, for example, insects and rats, and often have inadequate food storage, all of which have long been identified as contributing to the spread of infectious diseases. Homeless children suffer from depression, behavioral problems, and severe academic delay. Among sheltered homeless men and women, age-adjusted death rates are several-fold higher than in the general population. So I guess my question back to you then, Sam, and thank you for letting me digress a little bit on that, but is to say, how do you, could you reflect a little bit further on how what started for you as a crime story has now developed into this story of isolation versus community, and to the need for us marshaling all of our resources towards this national problem, and why can't we seem to get there? And that's a big question, but we saw this morning, those numbers, the bad numbers are continuing to rise, right? And why is it so hard?
Because I think there are lots of very potent forces in America today, technological, economic, forces of geography and city planning. I mean, you could go on and on. It's quite a number that push us, you know, away from each other. We were a country that, and it has a lot to do with our own view of government. For a long time, there's been this attitude in the country that government is wasteful, incompetent, bumbling. You know, the private sector is this magnificent, resilient creator of jobs. And this is a story, it's worth noting, that of the private sector creating the deadliest drug scourge we've ever had. And the people I interviewed, I could tell you, when I was trying to tell this story and feeling very alone, the only people I ran to for comfort were public health nurses, jailers, cops, DEA agents, all of whom earning a government salary. So we got away, it seems to me, honestly, I don't want to get into partisan politics, but one of the worst things that a president has ever said is that government is the problem. I'm a reporter, I know government can create problems, but the truth is, the American experiment, the greatness of the American experiment is to say the government is not the problem, it is us. We are the government. It's the greatest thing. I lived in Mexico for 10 years, and I can tell you, in Mexico, that is not an attitude that's very prevalent. The government is not of us. It is an invading force. And so, to my way of thinking, that attitude has pervaded, and a lot of things that came with it has pervaded the last 35 years in this country. And we've gotten away from the idea, you know, of this kind of idea that we all kind of can come together, that we all can be outside together. I say frequently in my speeches that when I was growing up, my mom was from Iowa. We were in Southern California. She would go every afternoon to the sidewalk at 6 p.m. and ring the farm bell that she brought from Iowa, and we'd all know to run home for dinner, right? Because she didn't have a clue where we were, right? But one thing she did know was that we were not going to be inside the house on a sunny Southern California afternoon. Now I go back to that same street, and about 50 miles from where I now live in LA, and there's never, I've been there, I don't know, 8 or 10 times, literally yet to see one human being on the street where I grew up playing, you know, baseball and riding bikes and skinning my knees and this kind of thing. We kind of retreated indoors, this kind of glorification of the individual at the isolation, at the expense of community, and we have a lot to overcome. People, I mean, the questions people sometimes ask me are very daunting, very humbling, and very scary if as a reporter, because a guy came up and asked me the other day, how do we change the culture? I'm like, I got no idea. You know, I'm a reporter, man. I don't, you know. But what I guess I fell back on was, how about just doing stuff outside, getting out of the damn house, you know, just on the street with neighbors. Whenever that happens, we do this all the time, and we have to do it, plan it. You know, we have to do. We did something. We've done it for this is the 4th year. Before Halloween, we do a thing called Street of Heads. You can please borrow this idea, okay? I don't care. I've not copyrighted it. It's bring all the kids together from all around, buy $1.49 styrofoam wig heads online. You can buy them for about $1.49, And all the kids get together and design and paint and do weird stuff with wig heads, and then we post them up along the street. So it's like an open air art gallery, right? Except for really what it is an opportunity to get together outside. That's all it is. That's an excuse. And geez, we have gotten away from that. So you're asking me, a reporter, it's always a bad idea to ask a reporter these kinds of questions, but you're asking me as a reporter, how do we defeat this? I don't know, get outside. Stop thinking that there's a child molester behind every tree. And let your kids go out and let them skin their knees. My God, that's a great thing. I got 2 purple spots right here because I skinned my knees so many times when I was growing up that they are like indelibly purple. They're faint now, but they're there. And so how do you change culture? How do you revert this kind of thing? I don't know. I'm just a guy. I'm just a reporter. But it does seem to me the logical steps seem to me to say, get outside, do stuff with your fellow people, and you do have to plan it now because it doesn't happen organically. You know, it doesn't just, people don't just go over to is Jimmy home? Can I play? Can he come out to play? No, there's got to be some damn play date. You know, for God's sakes. Oh, can we play the next Tuesday from 3 to 5? Oh, well, you don't have, no, we're busy then. We're doing something. You know, it's like business appointments, for God's sakes. So to my way of thinking, this is, you know, part of it. But it came to me, I believe deeply in immersion storytelling. So I went to Portsmouth. I was going to go to Portsmouth twice. I went 6 times for 5 days to a week each time. Come up to it that way.
So you just described something that I've been curious about, actually. So you're a reporter. Reporters generally, you know, observe and describe, maybe do some analysis, all that. But you're more than just a reporter, right? You're a storyteller.
Try to be.
Right, and a very good one. And now here you are staying so engaged in the topic that we have all cast you as some sort of resource person, maybe a solution.
You're all in big trouble then.
So this is just a quick question, but I have an actual real question in a minute. But my question is, what does that feel like as a reporter to I mean, you asked for it, frankly, but now that you've gotten it, what does it feel like to be in this other kind of role?
Well, it's very, very weird. It's because I spent most of the time in my career, I spent time interviewing criminals, guys with tears tattooed right here. And now I've been meeting politicians and supposed to go speak to the U.S. Senate's Health Care Committee. That's going to be the most surreal. You want to watch that because that's going to be like an Andy Warhol movie or something. It's just going to be so bizarre to see me do that. I can't even get my mind around it. Well, look, when I was a younger reporter, a crime reporter starting out, Peter Jennings, remember Peter Jennings, came to my town to do a story about gun violence because my town was an extraordinarily violent place, and I was the only crime reporter. So I had to write a story about the fact that Peter Jennings was coming to town to do a story about Stockton. Stockton, California was the town I lived in. And I thought that was too bad because he could not be a reporter because he was too well known and people were always like fawning over him. So I'm a little reluctant to accept the role. On the other hand, I have written 2 books about Mexico. Both of those books I'm very proud of. I love my little babies, my little books. You know, I think they were so good. But to promote them was like pushing a rock up a hill. It was relentless and hard. And so now it's not so hard. In fact, people are constantly getting emails, can you come talk here, come talk there. I guess the idea has been that if you're going to write a book and people want to actually hear what you have to say about it, that you have to go do that. You cannot just say, oh, I'm sorry, I just can't, you know.
Read the book, I said.
Yeah, read the book and, you know, or some kind of prima donna attitude. I just cannot adopt that attitude. So while I am kind of concerned that I will go places and people will know who I am, and that has happened, and that's a weird feeling, a very strange feeling, because I live in LA, and I see movie stars on the street frequently, and they don't have any kind of good life, you know. They're always being looked at and pointed at and that kind of thing. And, but reporters really should not be famous. I really believe that. I really believe that you should get to town and no one should write a story that you got to town. Basically, that kind of fame is not, you're not able to be a reporter then. And so I don't want to be famous. Definitely don't people writing about weird stuff, though, that I did on an airport or something like that, you know. I just want to be a regular reporter, a storyteller, and there's a fine line. But the other thing is, though, I have to say, everywhere I go, it is one of the great experiences of my life. You go there, and I'll never forget, I saw this one, I met these people in Portsmouth one time after the book had come out, and it was these grandparents, and they were very frail and short, and you know, and they took my hand, and they wouldn't let it go, you know, and they just thank you, and I don't really remember much more that we said to each other, except for that they were raising their daughter's child, and the daughter was either dead or in prison. I think in prison, actually. And it was this beautiful, beautiful moment. I didn't want to let their hand go. The dad, the grandfather, was just holding onto his hand, looking him in the eye, and you know, thank you. And I what else I don't know what to do under those circumstances. I really don't. But this has been repeated over and over. I've run into so many people who, come and hug you, want to know, say thank you. I don't know what to say except for you're welcome, and I tried the best I could, and it's so anyway. It gets very. It's an amazing feeling, but it's also you connect with America, man. It's so amazing to be able to do that.
Well, maybe they need to hug hope, and you're
and
embodying
it
hope
feels
for
a
them.
little bit like that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's this kind of happy medium. I want that. I want to hug those people. I want to try to say whatever I can say in a bumbling way to make them feel a little bit better. Although who knows? It's not possible really. They've suffered so much.
I'm going to give a heads up to our crew here in the room because this wasn't planned, but I'm going to open it up for a couple of questions from the audience. Before I do that, I'm going to ask one final one to give them a chance to grab the mics.
Yeah.
So we're here today to talk about research, right?
Yes.
And the research gaps in this area. So if from your perspective, and as you travel around, what are the gaps that you see in the current?
I actually think I don't want to hedge or avoid the question, but the truth is, I'm a layman, and you guys all know more about this. I was listening to Mike talking, and it's just, just beyond anything I know. I'm a reporter. I know the job of a reporter is very simple, but it's hard. The job is you talk to people who know more than you, and you drain them. That's it. That's the job, And so I think you all know better than I could possibly tell you what else needs to be studied. But what I'm here to suggest as a possible path forward is that you don't go off to your schools and then forget about it, that you come together and you look at the power that you have beyond what you would study, the money that you would bring, the PhDs that you would eventually attract, helps this region. The region lost a lot of that and really, really needs it. So don't think in terms of, we applied for a grant and this school got more than we did. No, you all got the grant, and don't let that infect. That's heroin talking right there. That's seriously heroin talking right there. Just avoid the turf battles and try to understand that America's made better when 3 schools from 3 different states combine to do one grant, and then who else is helped? Look to those recovering addicts. Look to them. They have the desire. They want to be moved. They want to be inspired. And then so much about this story is deadening, negative, fatalistic. And I compare it to, it's my background, I compare it to, I wrote a lot about Mexican immigrants. Mexican immigrants, it's a very complicated, controversial issue. Don't want to get into all of it. We could talk forever about it. But one of the things that happens when a town gets a lot of new Mexican immigrants is that what they bring with them, I know this, I've interviewed many, I know the villages they come from and been all over, is gratitude for an opportunity to reinvent their lives. They bring dynamism, willingness to walk through walls, like literally and figuratively, right? And energy, and they're rough around the edges for sure. That's exact a description of a recovering addict. You know, it's just a different brain, the same person, different brain. You don't get someone who's ripping off the manhole covers. You get a guy who's like, damn right, I'll wash Bob Evans' dishes till, midnight. But really wants something else. And you've got that opportunity. It's in the DNA of this region, seems to me, my reading of this history of this region. That was part of, I don't know if you've read my book, but the last 35, 40 pages, I lived in fear of writing a book that was about death and destruction and the worst of human behavior and degradation, the end, right? So part of the storyteller in me kind of like, loves an underdog story, and so I looked for a way of writing about some kind of redemption, and the strange thing, the bizarre thing was, midway through, I found it in Portsmouth, Ohio, the town that probably, if you had to pick one town, that would be the town that led us into this. They were the place where the pill mills were and all that stuff, And so I loved writing about what they were doing as a community, as a municipal government, as a, the recovery community and so on. The counseling center out there, to begin to create another narrative out there. Not just let's get high all day and steal the manhole covers, but let's move forward. Let's really aggressively go try to, let's do some productive, positive things. And the problem you're going to face today in today's media landscape is that there are very, very few experienced reporters on staffs at newspapers and radio stations anymore. When I was a reporter, I worked 10 years at the LA Times. Nobody thought of applying to the LA Times before they were 35. Now most of the reporters are under 30, and that means that they're green, and they don't know a lot. And so it's incumbent upon you, I always tell this, cops tell the same thing too. It's incumbent upon you to find the reporters that you think are serious and want to know more, and take them out to lunch and educate them. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a very good thing to do. I learned a lot from people who, mainly cops and prosecutors in my first job. They would sit down and explain fingerprinting to me. They'd explain ballistics to me. They'd explain that one guy, beautiful, wonderful man, just died a little while ago, was kind of my mentor when it came to understanding gangs and gang graffiti, and that guy was so great. Because he took the time, and it's more essential than ever. One of the reasons, if you read my book, you will see that there is nobody, not one person in the entire book shooting up. The entire book about heroin, nobody's shooting up, right? That was a conscious decision because I did not believe that that was a salacious, lurid thing that first of all, it's a cliche, every newspaper. How many stories have we seen about heroin with the arm, the rope, the rubber tied off, and all that? So I said, no, none of that. Not going to put any of that stuff in the book because it's not about that. It's about our own isolation and destruction of community. So, but the problem is that newspapers are under the gun. Everyone's got thinner budgets, thinner staffs. All of that means that there is more of a reliance on cliche. And so all of you all, need to think in terms of how to educate reporters on the larger stories or the more different stories that they're not considering, probably because they're too young and they don't know. This is a very complicated thing to understand. And so you need to invest a little bit in pointing out who would be the good ones to talk to, having lunch with them, figuring out, providing them with documentation. Documentation is, from whatever you're trying to do. If every editor wants to see if there's something that can be documented, wants to see the documentation. To my way of thinking, this is what's really, really important to understand, that the media landscape, I do not see that changing in the near or even far off future. We will be a country reported on by increasingly young, inexperienced people, and that's just the way it is. So you have to incorporate that. And the problem is that it's very easy to stop with the degradation and the worst of human behavior and not go on. I wanted to go on because I love stories with lots of nuance, that every time you think you know it turns it on its side. I learned that in Mexico. Every time I thought I understood Mexico, something would happen and there'd be something totally different, and it's very, very healthy intellectually to just kind of always have your mind open for new things. But the landscape today is very difficult, and it's very pressurized, and time is of the essence. So you have to help educate those folks and tell them the nuances, or tell them the different angles that they have not, because once people do the needle in the arm story, that's it. They think we've done the story. And I don't think that's true, but that's how they're thinking, I would say one thing, though, to this. You're absolutely correct. I do a writing workshop, right, back in LA. And I've also done lots and lots of interviews in prisons, and get lots of inmates talking to me. So there's lots of writing, young writers and stuff, or not young, but new writers, and frequently they all tell me, I want to write a book. And I could tell them, and I say, okay, great impulse. Don't ever think of writing a book. Think in terms, it's like climbing a mountain, right? 10,000-foot mountain, you start walking, and an hour later, the mountain's still so far away. So my feeling is always, what I tell them is, write one story from your life. Just take that small step, because that's how individuals, human beings, get encouraged. You achieve small things, couple of small achievements, you look back, I could do this. It's lost the mystery. It's lost. The addicts, I think, are the same way, honestly. I did a week. Actually, it wasn't so hard. Okay, I'll do another week or whatever, a day. That's what they say, one day at a time. Same idea. So while I do believe that this needs this long-term consistent vision, as I already talked about and you said so well, I also believe that in order to not, we are all human beings, we all lose encouragement or lose inspiration if it seems so far away that we can't achieve anything. And really start thinking in terms of, while the long-term goal is exactly as you say, think in terms of the small goals that just like a writer trying to write a book. I always tell people, that's a great thing, but don't think that you will stop if you think in terms of only the long term. You got to make those small achievements and take then a great joy and excitement and exhilaration and encouragement from those small achievements. So maybe something like this, the next time you're being able to meet with a couple of congressmen and senators and talk in terms of how to make this a regional lobbying thing. Maybe that's, I don't know, I don't live here, it's not my thing. I just thought that there was an idea that maybe could work. But yeah, I totally believe, as I said, the space program is the template. But then the space program was made up of these small little achievements on the way to this big goal.
As we begin to run down on our time for this session, I just want to focus us very quickly on next steps. Not that for the conference, that's going to come later, but in terms of Northern Kentucky University and the Ohio River Valley Addiction Research Consortium, if you look out the Student Union North, you'll see a very large facility with a construction fence still around it, but our Health Innovation Center will open in 2018, And we built that facility to facilitate the work of an institute for innovation in health. And that institute will continue to support the Ohio River Valley Addiction Research Consortium. That institution will have as its central mission to improve the population health of our region, and our region, in our minds, is a very large region. April 2nd through 5th, if you're planning on attending the National RX Drug Abuse and Heroin Summit in Atlanta, you'll see that NKU is the Platinum Education and Community Outreach sponsor. And this is a way of us demonstrating our commitment to continuing with this work. I mentioned the Brian Desmond talk in April. You'll also be hearing about an Inclusive Excellence in Healthcare conference that will be in April also here on campus. And so now I'll turn to Sam for final words on what's next for you. We're doing all this.
Well,
what are you doing?
what's next for me is next week I'm going to Seattle. And then Redding, California. That should be good too. But no, there was a point at which that I was going to write a book about Mexican drug cartel culture, and I still want to write that. Now I'm getting, on this trip, I've been getting emails from my publisher. You need to do something that follows Dreamland. And I'm like, I don't know what to do, but I have some ideas. In fact, I was thinking of a few while I was sitting here listening to a few folks. I was going, that might work as an idea, you know, that kind of thing. So, you know, I want to get back to writing. I love talking. I love seeing the country. I love seeing Americans who care, who are part of this. It's a beautiful thing. I do want to get back to writing at some point, but so it may be that I will. The book that I suggested possibly might work to my agent would require me moving to Indiana. So maybe I'll move to Indiana for a year.
You'd be part of our region,
Exactly,
and we would
right.
welcome you.
You know, it's like so much easier flight than a cross-country flight from LA, you know what I'm saying? So, but I want to say also, though, I'm so grateful for your energy on this, your commitment, your vision on this, and for all you guys for showing up. This is, people wonder, what do we do? This is what you do. It seems to me, I mean, that's the best I could think, you know, talking about these
Coming
kinds
together.
of things. From Tennessee, from Ohio, from West Virginia, from the folks in Ohio University, there you go, where I was just a few days ago. You know, just bringing folks together, it seems to me like this is kind of part of that. And it's a great thing to watch Americans do that, particularly after you've watched too much cable news.
That's right. Well, please join me in thanking Sam Quinones.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thanks so much. That was a great conversation, Sue and Sam. We really appreciate it. And Sam, thanks for your inspiration for this consortium. We're really grateful. And some of you, if you look at your name tags, some of you have a flame on your name tag. And if you have a flame on your name tag, then you get one of these Dreamland books that are on the tables here. So if you can look and see, and then before you leave today, that's your gift. It is, there may be more than one person at a table that has the flame, and so we'll have to get one from another table. As you might imagine at a university or any other organization, since this is a gift to you, there is paperwork. So if you could see Felicia in the back just to fill out a little piece of paper, that'd be great. So while the next panel is getting up here, we're just going to remind you to do some reflection as people are talking of those two ideas about how can we be a consortium and work together to really address this problem. I do want to say thank you to the Lieutenant Governor as she leaves too. So thank you very much for being here today. We really appreciate it. So is the panel coming up? Yeah. Okay, so we'll have the panel come up and we'll get them all ready to go. And while you're sitting and listening to people, if you can think of these reflection questions, please do so. Academics are going to write on the orange Post-it notes. Practitioners are going to write on the pink. And we're going to try to have you tell us about what are the research questions that we need to be asking and doing research on, and how can we make this consortium work where we gather together and work together to address this issue. So we will continue now with the next session. We're going to start with a video.
And I had seen throughout my career so many infants being admitted to the NICU because of unavoidable conditions. And I knew that their parents would have done anything to have spared them going through what they were going through. So for me, it was hard to have sympathy for the mother because NAS is a condition that is completely preventable and caused by the mother's choices. So it's hard for me to have sympathy for what the mother was going through while I was watching the baby go through the pain of withdrawal. After working with these babies for a long time, I really know that these mothers have extreme guilt for what their babies are going through and so much love for their babies. I really understand that addiction is a disease. It's not caused by a moral failure, and most of the time these moms have experienced some kind of trauma. It could be either sexual or physical trauma that precipitated their addiction, and a good portion of them suffer from some kind of mental illness. So in kind of coming to this realizations, it really made me understand that I had to be on the side of the mother. We had to be a team, nurses, medical staff, providers, and the mother, all one team, so that the baby can receive the best care possible. Another major thing that you have to overcome that's a challenge working with babies with NAS is that they have a very high-pitched, inconsolable shrieking while they're going through withdrawal. And it's challenging to learn how to calm the babies when they're going through this while remaining calm yourself. These babies won't go in their cribs and sleep typically for 3 hours in between their feedings. So when you're caring for 3 to 4 of them, you have to learn how to utilize all of your staff. I utilize a nurse that maybe doesn't have an assignment that's as demanding. They can I'll ask them to hold the baby. We have physical therapists, occupational therapists, child life, and I'll get a cuddler if there is one available. We've even had nurse practitioners hold babies while they chart. This is a challenging area of nursing to work in, probably one of the most. And I love taking care of these babies. But the rewards of this area of nursing are so great. When you see a mom that's in true recovery taking home a healthy baby, it's almost like it's a new chapter in her life that hopefully will keep her on the road to recovery.
Good afternoon, everybody awake from the video. I was sitting there earlier and realized, oh gosh, I have to follow Sam. That's going to be a tough act to follow. I'm Carla Saunders. I am a neonatal nurse practitioner at East Tennessee Children's Hospital. I work for Mednex Corporation, and I have been taking care of newborn babies in the NICU for over 20 years. And my story as a NICU nurse practitioner changed dramatically in 2010. And that's when our nursery saw a rapid increase in the number of babies we were admitting for withdrawal treatment. These children were coming to us in droves. We had tripled the number of babies by June of 2010 that we had had in the previous year. In perspective, we're a 152-bed hospital, about 6,000 deliveries a year, and presently 60 private beds for our NICU, approximately 800 admissions annually in our NICU, and averaging for the last 7 years approximately 300 of those admissions a year only for NAS. Our treatment program has treated over 1,800 babies to date in one hospital, under one protocol, one treatment provider team. Are you advancing these or am I? Are you? Okay, thanks. So anyhow, trying to move quickly through these. Our program was born out of necessity. We were drowning. I had a nurse that came to me one June afternoon, her hair a mess. It's about 8:30 in the morning. Baby in her arms crying. She had sweat, tears, and she said, we've got to do something. There's got to be a better way to do this. To that point, every provider was reading something, treating differently. The families were accusing us of treating babies differently based on their history. And frankly, I ran from these kids. I knew nothing about addiction. I knew nothing about withdrawal. I'm a NICU nurse. I went into NICU for a reason. If I wanted to do that, that's what I would have chosen. That's what was in my mind. So I ran from these kids. And at that moment in time, I stopped, I took a breath, and realized that this was going to be the beginning of the next chapter of my life. How big a book that was going to end up being, I had no way to know. This has taken me far beyond anything that I've ever been comfortable with outside the NICU. And so when you're facing this challenge, you have to think outside that NICU box. You have to get outside that isolate. And I challenge you to keep backing up. You got to go past what seems to be the most obvious answer, which is that these moms shouldn't be taking these medications while they're pregnant. You have to keep going all the way upstream. We see about 30% of the reported cases in the state of Tennessee on an annual basis come through just our doors in one hospital. This is a graph just real briefly of the trends that we've seen. It might be hard to see. The gray line is our hepatitis C rates, which have been addressed earlier. The blue line is our no prenatal care rates, which is very interesting if you look at what happened in 2014. I'll show you a graph in a second. And then the orange is late or limited prenatal care, defined as 3 visits or less. And then cocaine, we were seeing an uptick in cocaine. And since this graph, we've seen an uptick in heroin. Also HIV positive moms that were not diagnosed during pregnancy. And so now going back to what I saw when I first started, which was treatment of newborns for HIV. I never thought I'd see that again. In 2014, in June of 2014, Tennessee became very famous for amending our fetal assault law and putting an amendment in there for making it a criminal act punishable to have a baby with NAS. I knew this was going to be a problem, and I tracked our no prenatal care rates in our admissions. So this is just, again, our facility, our admissions. This is what happened to the rate of no prenatal care in that time period. Interestingly enough, 2 years later, it sunsetted, which was last summer. All the publicity when it went into play, no publicity when it was sunsetted. So it's been very hard to get that information out to women that they can feel a little safer about seeking prenatal care. Tennessee was the first state in the nation to have NAS as a reportable disease process. Our commissioner had the ability to do that, and so this is the end of year report for 2016. And I think, as you can see, there's multiple factors we track, which are not necessarily important here, but the most important piece of this is on the bottom right-hand box under the very top section, supervised replacement therapy. So we were talking about MAT, Suboxone, Subutex, Methadone. What we're seeing now is a change in the trend of what our babies are withdrawing from. When we started this program, it was hydrocodone, and in the last several years, it has consistently been an increasing that our babies are withdrawing from buprenorphine. About 70% of the cases are opioids that are prescribed to moms. So I think it's real important, and I think one of the things that I would challenge in future gatherings for this consortium is to move out of NAS. 7, 8 years ago, I was standing, raising the flag and feeling like I was screaming underwater. Nobody was listening about these babies. And when they did, they blew me off. And now I'm trying to get people to stop talking about it, because I think you've heard evidence today that there's great concern about where is the real problem occurring, where is the real damage occurring. And so it's important because the majority of these cases, 86% of the pregnancies that occur in opioid-using women are unintended. And so most of these pregnancies are not diagnosed until well into the pregnancy, which really limits what can be done both with prenatal care, with addiction treatment if they aren't already in it. And even in the MIT programs, not all programs are the same, and so women are not all getting education. It hit me one day when I was having what seemed like the usual endless battle about how could my baby be withdrawing, how could my baby be withdrawing, I'm clean, and it hit me that they didn't understand. And I said, well, you do know what the medication is that you are taking. And so when I explained to them that it was, without getting too technical, a form of an opiate, the jaws dropped on both the mom and the dad. And they were floored because they had no idea. And so I started doing more inquiring into this and realized that women were not being educated about what they were taking and what the risks were if they should become pregnant. So that's a very big key piece, that while MAT may be a great solution for people who are facing the addiction dilemma, we have to remember that if we don't educate women, we are going to end up in a situation where the NAS rates are not going to go down. They may, in fact, increase. So to just really kind of, I think when you are facing this problem, you have to look at it very local, in your institution, what your resources are, how big your facility is, what can your pharmacy do. You have to gather all the stakeholders and look at it from your perspective, do your literature reviews and decide on how you want to begin your treatment. And then you have to meet and you have to continuously analyze your data. If we had not had data driving our decisions, we would have made inaccurate decisions based on emotional responses. Because when you have those babies that are outliers and really difficult to treat, you feel like you're failing, and our numbers would show us, no, in fact, we were doing well, stay the course. So when you enter into that, I highly advise that you set forth some indicators that you're going to measure and use that as your driver as you continue to refine your program. I think we've touched on all of these today. People have talked about all these different aspects. And so there are multiple things that have to be looked at, and if you're facing this, you already know this, and it affects every aspect of your hospital. Whoop, that's not me. I would just take one last comment to say what I think. I just came off of a Global Action Platform Summit in Nashville talking about the opioid crisis both in the United States and on a global level. And And I think really to the point of what's just been said in the last 30 minutes, I think we are at a unique opportunity. We are at a time where it's time for us to take back our communities at the local level. And so digging in and beginning to look at what we can do from that ground level. But I really believe that this really is where we can turn the heels on the heels of healthcare reform. And we can do it from that local level because we have to move from a disease-driven healthcare approach to that wellness and preventative approach. And while we've talked about primary prevention, the true primary prevention is going to be changing our healthcare model, because to answer the questions about consent for urine drug screening and the various aspects of that, this needs to be something we need to be looking at from a primary care perspective, from wellness and prevention, universal screening of all patients. This needs to be something that we are doing risk assessment for mental health and behavioral issues and for the potential of addiction in all patients at all healthcare interventions. We need to adopt this as, if you would, the sixth vital sign, because we are going to have to begin to really be on the lookout for this in order to be able to stop the influx that we've got coming to us right now. And then everybody can spend the time doing the research on the best practices for treatment of women, of babies, and of our citizens who are struggling with this chronic relapsing disease. Thank you. Oh. Here.
Good afternoon. It's an honor for me to be able to speak to you about some of the work that we've done at St. Elizabeth Healthcare, which is right here in northern Kentucky, in this NAS population. Our focus has been on trying to optimize the pharmacotherapy for these babies. I wanted to start out by giving you some sense of the scope of the problem, although Dr. Botta may have done some of this already today. This is a map of the U.S., and you will note there are several states that are black. That would be Carla's state of Tennessee, my state of Kentucky, Mississippi, and Alabama. This is from a paper by Stephen Patrick, who's at Vanderbilt. He's done a lot of work on the epidemiology of NAS. And those states are black because their incidence of NAS at the time he did this study in 2015 is 2%. What that means is that 2 out of every 100 live-born babies in that state have NAS and required pharmacotherapy. In the state of Kentucky, Dr. Botta's office put this out in 2015. You can see how the incidence of NAS has mushroomed. Just over a 10-year period of time, it was up some 50-fold. So it's a large problem that we've been dealing with in the state of Kentucky as well as Tennessee. There are about 55,000 annual births in the state of Kentucky. We do 4,500 of those births at St. Elizabeth, which is about 8%. The incidence of NAS currently in the state of Kentucky is about 1,200 babies a year. So at St. E, you would think we see about 100 babies a year, and that's correct. Those numbers aren't very big by Carla's standards, but for us, we've been able to do some research into that population to try and determine what the best pharmacotherapy is to try and get those babies out of the hospital as soon as we can. Carla didn't really talk about her length of stay. So in the first half of 2017 at St. Elizabeth, we saw 113 babies that had been exposed to opiates. Of those 113, 53 of them, or 47%, wound up having neonatal abstinence syndrome and needing pharmacotherapy for their symptoms. That's about what most people see around the country. At St. Elizabeth in 2015, our median length of stay was 16 days. By 2017, 16, we were able to drop that down to 12 days. 4 days may not sound like a big number, but if you take those 4 days and you multiply it times the 1,200 babies in the state of Kentucky, it becomes a bigger number, and it would save a lot of money if other institutions use the same pharmacologic approach that we use at St. Elizabeth. So the approach we used was based on earlier work by Walter Kraft, who is in Philadelphia. He was the first one to suggest using buprenorphine to treat the babies who had been exposed to opiates in utero. And we were aware of his work several years ago and started using buprenorphine in the middle of 2015. This is a controlled double-blind trial that he did comparing buprenorphine to morphine, which is what I think Carla said they're using in Tennessee. And this did not get published until earlier this year in the New England Journal of Medicine. In this particular study, you'll note that for length of stay, in his control group on morphine, that was 33 days. When he used buprenorphine to treat that same population, his average length of stay was 21 days. So he was able to drop his length of stay by a third by using buprenorphine to treat this population. So we developed a couple of years ago, since we were aware of his data before it got published, our own treatment protocol, which involves buprenorphine as the primary opiate for those babies who need to receive an opiate, along with clonidine as an adjunct. We've tried to get away from phenobarbital as an adjunct because of the adverse effects on neural development in some animal models. And you can see then, this is data from a paper that we're currently in the process of publishing. It's been accepted for publication. It should come out in the next couple of months. There were 174 babies then that we've treated with buprenorphine. That'd be the largest population of babies treated with buprenorphine anywhere. And that we compared that to the babies we had treated earlier with methadone or morphine, since there have been other published studies showing that methadone and morphine are pretty much equivalent in terms of length of stay. You can see that our days of opioid treatment that were required dropped from 9 to 7 days, as well as the number of days that the babies required being in the hospital. So as I showed you in the earlier slide, we're currently down to 12 days for those babies to be in the hospital, and on 7 of those days, they're receiving some opiate therapy. And a 12-day length of stay is about the best of anywhere in the country, I would say. The two populations were otherwise quite similar. About 50% of babies in each group require some adjunct therapy. As I said before, for us, that's clonidine. Other places may use phenobarbital. And there are about 10% of the babies that we try and treat with buprenorphine that we're not able to control, that we wind up having to use morphine for that population. So those are the data I wanted to share with you today. And I'd like to now introduce my colleague, Kathy Wedeck, who's from the Children's Hospital.
I thank you all for being here today and to wanting to learn more about neonatal abstinence syndrome and the effects. I have chosen to speak to what we have been seeing in our follow-up clinic. We do have a neonatal abstinence syndrome clinic at Children's Hospital for those infants who have needed therapy for their symptoms. We also have a follow-up clinic at Good Samaritan Hospital in which we see babies who have been exposed to opioids and do not need actual treatment and are therefore sent home somewhere between 4 and 6 days at birth. Some of this data will also be reflective of the timing of having infants at Good Samaritan Hospital that we followed who were treated for their NAS. Before I go into this data, though, I would like to say that we, as a group in the Cincinnati area, a collaboration of people who are working with children who have either had neonatal abstinence syndrome or been exposed. There will be a conference next week to look at longer-term outcomes of these children than what I'll present right now. So today I'm going to address some of the medical issues, developmental issues, and sensory and behavioral issues we see with the children that we follow. The medical issues that have been noted, particularly in the first 2 years of life, have to do with ophthalmologic issues, gross motor issues, particularly torticollis, positional issues such as plagiocephaly, and other muscle tone issues. Here you can see an experience that of babies that were seen in 2014 and 15 related to whether they were treated or not treated, whether they were exposed to mothers on MAT with methadone or buprenorphine. And as you can see that if we look at the areas such as muscle tone, regardless of whether the baby was treated or not treated, we found an increased number of infants with low muscle tone, therefore at risk for motor delays. This was a bit more reflective if the mother was receiving methadone and the infant was treated with methadone, but that's statistically different. Sensory issues were also seen across the board, regardless of whether the child was treated or not treated. But torticollis appeared to be much more significant in those infants who were treated. And again, not statistically different, but surprisingly seen more often in children whose mothers were on MAT with buprenorphine. Ophthalmologically, 21% of our babies who were exposed showed difficulty with eye issues, most commonly strabismus, but we also had babies with nystagmus, opsoclonus, and this is compared, a 21% incidence in these children is compared to an overall incidence in this age child of about 2.5% to 3%. So we had almost a 10-fold increase in eye issues diagnosed in children who were exposed in utero. And again, these were more commonly seen if the moms had been on methadone. Now, whether this was because of a doubling effect of methadone, we do treat in the Cincinnati area more commonly with methadone than with buprenorphine. And so whether it's because of the treatment or because of the doubling, having been exposed in utero and treated. But the concern as we move on is, what is it? And we've talked about this today. What is the cause of the poor outcomes? Is it the exposure? Is it what we're doing? And so this just brings up that question. This is somewhat similar to data that's been presented before. These are all children that we followed in the NAS clinic, so therefore they were treated, and these are developmental outcomes of 40 out of 60 children who reached the age of 2. 40 out of 60 were tested, and what we see is that compared to standard scores on the Bailey, not compared to a cohort of children within their own region, but compared to standard scores, children with NAS did score lower than the standard Bailey scores. And I think the thing that was shown earlier, which is more significant, the paper quoted by Dr. Botto, which is that when you compare children who have had NES to children in their own neighborhoods, becomes even more significant. Because if we're talking about a standard score of 100, but you live in a neighborhood where the standard score is 111 and you're at 95, that's a much different view in the school system than if you are in a neighborhood with the standard score is 100 and you have a 95. So I think as we go forward and we look at developmental outcomes, we also have to look at what are the children having to deal with every day, and not just say, oh, they score nicely here, but it's their everyday, what they're dealing with every day. So what questions can we look at just in this group of children as we move forward? So as has been mentioned before, are the results we're seeing, are the issues children need to deal with just related to being exposed to opioids in utero? Does it matter whether their mothers are an MAT? Does it, from a standpoint of, are they on methadone? Are they on buprenorphine? How is that affecting the child? Does the treatment we give them affect their long-term outcomes? This is what got me into this whole thing. I'm pretty scared to think that I make outcomes worse because I think I'm doing something better for the child. And so I think we need to be looking at how do we score children? How do we decide what children need medical treatment? Can we make those locations where the children are more beneficial to their first week of life so that they can come through this time period without needing to be re-exposed to opioids? And then what about genetics? What about where the mom was before? I think that if we look at it, every person who has a problem with opioids was once a child. What happened in their childhood that led them to this opioid problem, and how is their opioid problem going to affect their children? Thank you.
So before we get started with questions, can we just thank our panel, Carla, Ward, and Kathy one more time, please? How much time do we have, Gail? Okay. My name is Samantha Langley. I'm the Vice Provost of Graduate Education, Research, and Outreach here at NKU, and I'm happy to be moderating this session. I'm going to start with one question, and then we're going to turn it over to the audience for questions, so if our microphone people could be ready. What I'd like to hear from the panel is your perspective, especially for those in the audience that are from universities, researchers, and academics. What is the research that we should be working on for you? What do you need from us in terms of next steps for research? Whoever wants to go first, go right ahead.
I'd like to, do I need to turn this
Are
on?
there?
No,
Okay.
I think there's some.
I'd like to see more looking at the children. I'd like to see more looking at the preschool children, working with issues that they may have, starting early and not waiting until we get to the school systems and saying, now we need to have a program. I think if we could even start with identification of children as opioid exposed, that automatically gets them into early intervention programs, automatically has them looked at very closely for an IEP in school. I think that we can start them on a better route than having children get expelled from kindergarten because their behavior is so bad.
Yeah, and I mean, I agree. I don't think we know what the long-term consequences are yet. of this population. As Carla pointed out, it was in 2010 when all this started. So the 2010 children are just now hitting first grade and second grade. So I don't think we know what that population is going to be like, and what can we do on the front end then to try and get the best outcomes we can.
I agree, and I think one of the problems we have is that if you back it up to what do we need to look at, we don't have good definitions. There's not a standard utilized definition for NAS. There's a general definition, but not everybody uses that same definition. We're not screening. All newborn nurseries do not have protocols in place for screening for NAS. So we have trends, because I think the same people are reporting, but not all children are being screened for. We screen for all kinds of things in the newborn period based on maternal risk factors, but there is a reluctance due to stigma to do this in some newborn nurseries, which affects our ability to track some of these outcomes. There's not good communication between the healthcare field and the education departments, and so they don't want to tag children with these identification and then have them hit the schools. But I think we have to get outside of that, and some of that is going to require sitting down and saying, before we can really go forward with any more meaningful work, we need to all be speaking the same language. Length of stay, to some people, I realized looking at some of the literature, we're a children's hospital, so we have no inborns. So by the time a baby gets referred to us, it's generally diagnosed with NAS. So my numbers for length of stay don't include an observation period from birth to diagnosis, but some of the literature, when they're looking at overall length of stay, includes that in their length of stay. So there are different things that we are looking at, and we're speaking the same language, we think, but not entirely, and that kind of muddies our data and makes it difficult to really make good decisions based on the data.
So we're fortunate in this particular geographic area. The Greater Cincinnati Health Council a couple of years ago got together, and all of the hospitals agreed to do universal screening for any mom who showed up to deliver. So every mother who delivers a baby anywhere within the 275 Beltway is screened for illicit drugs or whatnot, and that way you don't miss babies that are at risk that might wind up going home too soon. And that was compared to earlier data where people try and do historical screens by asking people to use drugs, and you miss about 50% of the babies if you do it that way versus doing it the way that it's done in this area with universal screening. The rest of the state, I don't think, does universal screening. Dr. Bada would know that, but it'd be,
She's shaking her head no.
She's shaking her head no, that's what I thought. But, really, if you want to capture the entire population, like every hospital in the state should be mandated to do universal screening.
Questions from the audience for our panel? I know it's the after lunch lull. Somebody must have something right over here.
Do you folks track social support for the moms? What their setting is at home, who's in a program, who's out of a program, that sort of thing?
So Danielle's sitting out here, who's from St. Elizabeth, and she's going to talk like the time after the next time. So that she'll address that for you, but the short answer to your question is yes.
How about from a Tennessee perspective, do you know?
Yes, we do. While they're in the hospital, that is being assessed in preparation for discharge. And we have a Grow With Me clinic that we started to see how that is all working, and addresses both, looking at their Bailey scores, et cetera, and follows them out 5 years. But that's an aspect of it that we look at to see how that's working or not.
And we at Good Samaritan Hospital have a program that's called HOPE. so that the mothers are followed through their pregnancy and even out to a year afterwards as to different social supports that they need.
This is a good time, sorry, for me to remind you that you have in your packet the contact information for everybody here in the audience, including the speakers. So if you want more in-depth follow-up with anybody that you've heard speak today, or just to make connections, you do have everybody's contact information there. If questions occur to you on the way home that you wish you'd asked. Go ahead, I interrupted.
I was just going to say, I think you touched on something that's key, is it's really, we need to be engaging moms as early in the process as possible and getting them to be partners with us through that whole journey, and then follow up with them. Don't just let them go and not have all the support services in place. I also would challenge, I think a big area for research that we need is, I think we need to blow up all the scoring, and we need to really look at a different way of approaching when does a baby really need medical intervention? When does that need to be increased? I think nothing to the discredit of anybody who's done all the work on the tools that are out there, but I think I hear consistently from people who are using various of the tools that are presently out there that we need to look at this from a different, innovative approach. And, you know, I kind of got this idea from having moms or dads who've been through withdrawal look at a baby and tell me differently than what our scoring was, and not making excuses that the baby wasn't as bad as we thought, but that the baby was worse than we thought, and the scores weren't reflective of that. And so that kind of made me think that, you know, maybe we're approaching this from a really, we need to look at it from a different perspective. So I think, again, when you're talking about length of stay and all these different aspects, we don't even have one tool that everybody's using. Mostly Finnegan, but not everybody. So.
I think earlier the overall ECS scoring.
Yeah, the new.
Overall ECS scoring, eating, comforting, and sleeping was mentioned. Mm-hmm. And with that scoring, at least with babies who were exposed to methadone, at Yale they were able to decrease their length of stay to 5 days. This incorporated the mother into the care of the baby, and this made the big difference. It made a big difference for the mothers also. I mean, I think we've also spoken today about how important it is to a mother to be able to parent her baby. And if we involve her in this overall care, which we don't do when we're so worried about getting a score and saying, do we need to treat the baby because the score is such and such? And I think, Dr. Bada, you brought up that you really need to have consistency of scores, that you can't just say, oh, I'm going to look for 3/8s or I'm going to look for 2/12s, but you have to be consistent with your scoring. And so if we look more at not being so scared of the Finnegan score, but being more aware of what this baby really looks like and what is it that gets this baby into trouble. Does this score get the baby into trouble, or does it not being able to eat, so they're losing a lot of weight, not being able to sleep or being crying all the time and losing the weight and the energies because of that? Or is it because they got increased muscle tone, which all of them will have, and they will sneeze and they will have loose stools, but what is it that's really life-threatening as they go through their withdrawal? And I think we get too afraid that we won't treat the right score, that we lose focus as to what we're really trying to do.
Do you see a role in anesthesia playing into your NAS scores or delaying that onset of symptoms at all for the parturient during the OB?
So the half-life of the drugs that the moms are using when the babies are in utero are fairly long. And most of the anesthesia that they've gotten acutely for delivery, or fentanyl, for example, and an epidural, are generally not issues for us.
One more question up here, then they will think we're going to have to call it a wrap.
What is the in-hospital, in-nursery mortality rate for your dad?
So the question was, what is the in-hospital mortality rate?
In-hospital mortality rate.
If you're talking, so by definition in our study, NAS is going to be greater than 35 weeks and only there for withdrawal. So they
Yes.
can't have a comorbidity.
Just that you diagnose as having NAS.
Okay,
Across the
zero,
board, not subdividing.
zero.
Any other?
Not zero, because we have fewer babies than she has.
Oh, that's right.
Right, and I can't say that I've had a baby to die because of NAS. I mean, certainly you can be concerned about what morbidities the babies have because their moms have either not presented or presenting after a heroin overdose or whatever, and then those babies develop other issues.
So once again, please join me in thanking our panel.
Thanks so much. There really has been a lot of work done on this topic, and there's still more to do. So we're bringing up another panel of NKU researchers, and they have had a collaboration of 7 researchers, and their work is really trying to demonstrate the interdisciplinary work that can be done on this topic. And so we've got a couple of the researchers there that are going to join us in just a minute. And I think maybe Sam is leaving. Can we say goodbye to Sam? So let's thank Sam. Thank you, Sam. We appreciate you being here. Safe travels. And so, are you guys going to stand up here? Okay. So we'll now have a research panel from NKU.
Hi, my name is Gannon Tagger. I am currently serving as the interim chair for the Department of Nursing at NKU. My background is a pediatric nurse practitioner, and hence part of my interest in this. And I am part of a team, a transdisciplinary team here at Northern that has been researching particularly the perceptions of the barriers to MAT for pregnant women and comparing them to the barriers for non-pregnant women. So this is our research team. We have Dr. Perry Lou Goddard here from psychological science. From social work, we have David Wilkerson that worked with us. He's sitting in the back there. From nursing, we have Deborah Bryant, who could not be here today, as well as myself. Communications, Dr. Monica Gallegos, and then from informatics, Dr. Gary Osanich. So truly, truly transdisciplinary, working across many disciplines on campus. We decided to work with or to research pregnant women and see what their perceptions were. We felt that this was a very vulnerable population that was not researched a whole lot. NAS has had a ton of research, but what about the moms before the baby is born? We've heard multiple times today about Kentucky having a high rate of NAS, and then Boone, Kenton, and Campbell County have one of the highest in the state of Kentucky. So in Northern Kentucky, part of the problems that we have found is there is a lot going on with the treatment of addiction and substance use disorder, but it's very fragmented. So across the 3 counties, we have multiple municipalities, everybody's trying to work on something, but not everybody's necessarily working together. We have currently 2 methadone clinics in operation, and we actually partnered with the Northern Kentucky Med Clinic with the pregnant women who were in treatment there. Kentucky Medicaid does not pay for methadone. That is one difference, that across the river they do. There's only a handful of buprenorphine providers. There's some private physicians and then some St. E's physicians as well. County jails are working on in-house treatment programs. There's Vivitrol, there's emphasis on 12 steps. And then still in Northern Kentucky, it's very heavily based on abstinence thinking. Very limited acceptance of harm reduction practices. And you can notice that by the fact that it's very difficult. We've had multiple problems in getting needle exchanges, just a lot of resistance to harm reduction treatment. So our focus was on, again, opioid-dependent pregnant women in Northern Kentucky. We wanted to identify barriers to care, so what kept them from getting to treatment, what kept them from getting prenatal care. We wanted to focus on stigma. Did they perceive that they had, they were stigmatized in the healthcare system? What was the role of their support systems? So how important does that play, their family, their friends, their significant others? And then for part of the study was a comparison. So the control group of non-pregnant opioid-dependent women to pregnant opioid-dependent women. We did, so again, just reiterating, it's not a well-understood population. We've heard multiple times today about NAS and the treatment of the babies, but what's happening in the moms' lives that leads them to this situation in the first place. So there were 2 studies done. It was a qualitative and a quantitative study. This was done last spring. We did it again at the Methadone Clinic, the Northern Kentucky Med Clinic. And the qualitative questions, which is my portion of the study, is to what extent do pregnant women with opioid use disorder perceive that stigma affects their care? How do pregnant women with opioid use disorder perceive that the services available to them? And to what degree has stigma interfered with accessing these services? We did surveys. So surveys were done for the quantitative piece, and then structured interview or semi-structured interviews for the qualitative piece. So the women at the clinic have to attend a pregnancy group once a week. So the interviews were done while these women were at the pregnancy group. And again, completely voluntary, but there was an incentive of 4 methadone treatments for the survey participation and 5 methadone treatments if they participated in the survey. So they could get up to 9 treatments paid for. And I need to back up and say that this study was actually funded by a seed grant from the university. It's part of the Emerging and Signature Research area. And I would like to thank Provost Doc Rollins for giving us this opportunity to conduct the study. So the interview, it was phenomenology that we used to analyze the interview. We did use a theory. It's good, go back to good nursing practice, using a good nursing theory to analyze the interviews. We use the theory of human becoming. And the main tenets of this theory are that it's really uncovering phenomena as experienced by these women themselves. And then creating theories from that and making meaning of these experiences. And that these experiences that the women have, they influences their participation in their health. So what are they really experiencing as we see it? So through the analysis, 4 themes emerged. And a lot of this we've actually heard as I've been listening today to different people speak. Everybody kind of touched on all of these themes actually. So motivation, fear, scarcity, and resilience were the 4 themes that emerged. And under motivation, the biggest thing was that the women are tired of being sick. They're trying to do what is best for the baby. A handful of the women that I interviewed, we interviewed 23 women total. A handful of them were there because they had to be, because they had mandated to be, they came from jail, they had to be in this treatment. Most of them were not. Most of them were there voluntarily. So they want to do what is best for the baby. They really are trying. And they understand that it's not an easy road. They understand that it takes work. So just some of the quotes that we had. So it helped me to stay clean, not only for being pregnant, because you have a reason to, but meeting with my counselor when I became pregnant, it was more than the pregnancy counselors care more. So I guess just having someone to talk about everything really helped. So part of these meetings at the Northern Kentucky Med Clinic is they do have pregnancy counselors. So they have some support. They get some teaching during these meetings. This other quote, she was clean for her first 2, so they were pretty normal. She's worried about being on methadone and having a kid, but I mean, after doing the research and everything, I would much rather have a methadone baby than a heroin baby. I'm a lot more comfortable with that. I'm not going to have to worry about losing it or nothing. So in her mind, she is in recovery, she's getting treatment, and hopefully that will keep her from losing her baby and being able to take her baby home. You just gotta wanna do it, and if you wanna do it, you'll get it done. And then if you wanna be clean, you have to put the work in, and again, just tired of being sick and tired. So these women are trying, they're trying really hard. And it goes back to that we have to think about the entire experience of the mother and what's best for the mom, what's best for the family, and what's best for the baby. So for fear of being judged, fear of having their children taken away, that was a big one. Fear of not being able to stay substance-free, fear of not being strong enough, and fear of the baby withdrawing. So fear of being judged, some of the quotes that I heard in being a nurse kind of just made me want to cringe. But the lady, the social worker lady that works in the hospital, she was very rude. And then it scares me because I want to get off of it, but I don't want to get off of it so quickly, just quit like going, I'm afraid. I don't ever want to say I would use again, but I'm not going to pretend. So they want to stay in recovery. They want to be substance-free, but they also know that it takes a lot, and they also know that the likelihood of them being able to do it on their own is very, very small. I'm more worried about is dealing with CPS and that kind of stuff. Because I mean, even though I'm in treatment and all of that kind of, just knowing they can take them or just not knowing is driving me nuts. So fear of having that baby taken away. Some of them have had children taken away. They know what it's like. And can I really be strong? Can I do it for her? I mean, I know it's about doing it for myself. Is she going to be enough to make me do it? So it's really heartbreaking to listen to these women talk about their fears and knowing, again, and just reiterating the fact that they really want to do what's best. They're trying. This one again about judgment. So like when I have my non-stress tests, there's some nurses that are like, like whisper behind you and I'm just kind of, or like judgmental, Like she's on methadone, but I mean, if they knew the alternative, they wouldn't be so judgmental about the methadone. But I mean, some people are just not informed. So that's part of our job, right? Is to help people be informed. I will say, a couple of the women made comments that they had babies several years ago, even up to 5 years ago, and had been in treatment, had been on methadone, and things have gotten better over the past 5 years or so, that the health care they received was much less judgmental now than it was with their first child. So we are getting better. We're just maybe not quite there yet with everybody because, as you can see, some nurses definitely make you feel you're less than. For scarcity, big thing was scarcity of resources. So financial resources, lack of knowledge of resources, and transportation. Scarcity of support. So many of them have addicted family members. They're surrounded by addiction, surrounded by substance use, or family members who don't understand medication-assisted treatment. So they don't understand why they think it's substituting one drug for another. So what good is going to a methadone clinic? It's not going to help you. And then scarcity of confidence, and we've already seen a little bit of that. So it's very hard getting back and forth, having to find money, getting a way to get a pass, looking for a place where there are resources to help me with that. In the meantime, figuring out how to take care of all of that. So you need access to addiction help. This is a big one. You need access to addiction help immediately when you decide to get clean. 24 hours can make a big difference. So knowing where to go. I miss a lot of doctor's appointments because I don't have transportation. And I would say that it is probably the hardest thing for women is the different stuff they expect you to do, and then trying to find the time to do it if you have other children and other stuff going on. And the really interesting thing that came out of this for me was resilience. So yes, these women are going through treatment. Yes, they have a substance use disorder, but they have been through so much, and so much more than any of us can probably even imagine, and they are still trying. So many of them have been through tragedy. Somebody mentioned that earlier. So beatings, the death of a child. Although they have a history of relapsing, they continue to try. So one person has a really strong support system all the way around, and so things are working well for her, but you have to rely on skills to stay clean in time of stress. So helping the women develop the skills to stay substance-free is really important. So my husband decided to cheat, and we're getting a divorce, and that kind of relapsed a little bit, but then it went back to normal, and I met my fiance, and we're having a baby, and we're good. So she found some good support in her current fiance. My son, I gave custody of him up when my daughter died. So this was a woman whose daughter had drowned on the babysitter's watch. He lives with his grandma and grandpa now. That was my choice. But I did it because if Wood, as a mother, I think that was the best choice I could have made, because if not, he'd probably be dead. I found out in November my boyfriend actually committed suicide, and I found out 2 weeks after his funeral that I was pregnant. It's been a lot, but it's what's helped me get clean. And then, this, again, speaking of resilience, just to know how far I've come. I just remind myself that I don't want to get back to that point. I really, truly believe that you have to hit a bottom, and everybody's bottom is different. So ultimately, and again, multiple people we've talked about this today, that care coordination is part of the answer to this problem. So not just looking at a snapshot in time, but helping these women from the time they find out they're pregnant and following them through and helping them find the resources they need and developing the skills they need to stay substance-free once the baby is born. So we hope to, as a team, address this problem through the Health Innovation Initiative. We have a population health focus here now at NKU. And so we're looking at care beyond the four walls. The consumer focus, using evidence-based practice, transdisciplinary care. It takes all of us, not just one health discipline. It takes everybody. It takes the educators. It takes the communications people, so not just even health, everybody. And then creating some new academic programs as well on campus so that people that go out into the community that are focused on population health, when they graduate, they are able to continue the work, hopefully, that we start. I wanted to just leave you some final thoughts from the qualitative piece of the study. It is not a conscious decision to become a heroin addict, and people treat addicts differently depending on their point of view and understanding the problem. So just again, reiterating the fact that educating is really important.
Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Perry Lou Goddard, and I really am just kind of filling in today. I'm here to present the quantitative part of this study, but I want you to know who really deserves the credit. This study was designed by and conducted by Dr. Monica Gallegos from the Department of Communication here at NKU, and a person named Annie Thompson, who at the time was Monica's graduate student. Annie has now graduated and is, in fact, an instructor in the Department of Communication. I helped with some of the design of the surveys, and I did the first round of data analyses, but otherwise, I mean, this is really Monica's study, and she would have been here to present it, but she had a family emergency and had to go out of state. So I'm really just filling in and trying to show you what a cool study Monica did. So, all right, so the research question was about the barriers that pregnant women and women who are not pregnant but who are receiving methadone treatment face when they're trying to complete this kind of treatment. And the literature suggested that pregnant women at least
face a whole lot of barriers with regard to really getting any kind of treatment, but especially with medication-assisted treatment, there's a lot of stigma associated with that. The community at large in many, many places has very stigmatizing attitudes about methadone. The not in my backyard, I don't want a methadone clinic here, don't even talk about it. So really this was, we were trying to look at a snapshot quantitatively of the women at this clinic who were getting methadone treatment who were pregnant and comparing them to a group of women at the same clinic who were not pregnant. So we had 30 participants who were pregnant and 59 who were not pregnant. And again, they were all receiving methadone treatment. The not pregnant women were about 9 years older on average than the pregnant women. So the pregnant women averaged a little over 28 years old, and the non-pregnant women were a little over 37 years old. But that's on average. There was a great deal of variability there. The non-pregnant women had on average almost 3 children, and the pregnant women had 2.5 children. And of course, there's that half kid, right? So, but another thing that was interesting is that the modal amount of education that was reported by these 89 women was some college. So there was, again, a lot of variability there, but this was, as a group, not an uneducated population. So the women were compared on this quantitative survey that Monica developed, and she asked them about a lot of different issues, including their commitment to treatment and their practical barriers to care. So we were really interested in what are some of the things that create obstacles. So issues like transportation, like that was something that came up in the qualitative study, right? So transportation, childcare, how they are going to pay for treatment, the experience of stigma and support, both from the clinic staff and from other patients, the feelings of being judged by strangers in the community, the feelings of being judged or supported by family, friends, and significant others for seeking medication-assisted treatment, social support from friends, family, significant others, and overall loneliness and demographic information. So the women all completed this survey first, and then it was a subset, 23 of the pregnant women also agreed to participate in the interview study that Gannon and Deb Bryant conducted. All right, so I'm just going to present a snapshot of the results. One of the things that was surprising to us was that overall there were few differences between the pregnant and the non-pregnant women. And some of the results we discovered were really quite encouraging. For example, their commitment to treatment for both groups was 3.8 on a 4-point scale. Okay, yeah, I mean, if my course evaluations were that high, I'd be like, yes. So, I mean, that's really, really high. It can't go any higher than 4, and the average was 3.8 for both groups, so that was really encouraging. Also, frankly, NKY Med Clinic should feel really good about the job they're doing, at least with these women, because they reported very little stigma. They didn't feel judged by the staff. They felt that the staff respected them and treated them with dignity. We did look at some specific, well, we looked at all the barriers, and I'm reporting some select ones here. Again, there were no significant differences here between the pregnant and non-pregnant women. We had expected transportation to be a bigger deal overall, but it turned out that it was by no means the biggest barrier reported by the women in this study. Not surprisingly, the women in both groups reported feeling stigmatized by strangers, and if you've ever talked to anybody in the community about their perceptions of the methadone clinics in Covington, chances are what you're going to hear is some pretty stigmatized stuff. They're going to be like, oh, there's those long lines of people outside 6 o'clock in the morning waiting to get their drugs. And of course, I can't resist. I'm like, yeah, you know who's standing outside at 6 o'clock in the morning? The people who have jobs. Right? So, yeah, you should honk and congratulate them. Don't do that because that would be weird. Okay, but still, seriously, you should not be stigmatizing the people that are standing in line. The highest barrier identified by both groups was paying for treatment. And Gannon has already mentioned an issue related to that in Kentucky. I'm going to circle back to that at the end. And then Dr. Gallegos had a brainstorm. She thought, how about if we look at the pregnant women and divide them up by whether they are relatively early or relatively late in their pregnancy. So she divided the group into those who were less than 5 months pregnant and those who were 5 months or more pregnant. And it happened to break pretty evenly. It was 14 and 16. So we had a pretty even sample size there. And here we found a few significant differences. But to our surprise, what we found where there were differences were that the women who were further along in pregnancy, those who presumably were more likely to be showing, were actually reporting more support for getting treatment and less perception of stigma. So that's kind of awesome and very unexpected. Okay, everything in the literature that talks about stigma toward pregnant women with opioid use disorder says that, you know, they're the most stigmatized group and everybody's hating on them, and if you know about them, they're going to be mistreated, right? And at least at this clinic, people are being treated well and they're not being made to feel less than by the clinic staff. So, summary and implications, the results were surprising and encouraging. So we found that both pregnant and non-pregnant women reported strong commitment to treatment, which is awesome, since they're getting the gold standard, right? Okay, methadone treatment is the best supported treatment for opioid use disorder. And they were also encountering relatively few serious barriers. So NKY Med Clinic, they're doing something right there, for sure. Maybe a lot of things right. We don't know why the women later in pregnancy were reporting feeling more supported and less stigmatized. You know, you could speculate that maybe at least at the clinic staff, they're bending over backwards to make sure that women who are showing and are probably feeling stigmatized by the rest of the world are not feeling it from them, that they're really reaching out and making sure that they're connecting with this potentially stigmatized group. And then paying for treatment, okay? Kentucky, one of 17 states that does not provide methadone through Medicaid. Indiana is another one. Ohio has it right. They pay for methadone through Medicaid. And it troubles me that in Kentucky, Medicaid pays for buprenorphine and it pays for Vivitrol. And Vivitrol is far more expensive than, many times more expensive than methadone. And yet it has far less research support. I'm not saying it's not a good treatment. It's just that when you look at the weight of the evidence, there is so much more evidence in favor of methadone than there is for Vivitrol. But dang it, in Kentucky, we pay for Vivitrol with Medicaid, but boy, we don't pay for methadone. So I think that that's one of the take-home messages for this study and has some real policy implications for it. Any questions? Time to shift change? Yeah? Questions? Comments? Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Great work by some great researchers, and so they are going to be around. We're going to take a break, so if you want to talk some more with the researchers, you can search them out.